Hello, and welcome to Bluestem Earth Festival 2021. I'm your host and committee co-chair, Megan Butel. We are thrilled to be with you all today and have a great collection of speakers and videos to show. Bluestem Earth Festival is presented by the Joliet Franciscan Sisters and Associates and is typically hosted at the University of St. Francis. The goal of Bluestem is to empower individuals and families to live more sustainable, socially responsible lifestyles. Today, Bluestem speakers will be discussing topics on sustainability, health and wellness, as well as nature and garden. Please feel free to ask questions or use the chat throughout the event. Speakers will try to answer some questions at the close of their talk. Our first speaker today is Terry Gallagher. Terry uses his rather unusual breadth of experience as an engineer, a manager of hazardous chemical plants, a pastor of local churches, and his work as a public theologian to engage people in responding to the climate crisis. His presentations, writings, and workshops are a combination of his skills as a storyteller of real-life experiences, faith journey reflections, a bit of science and technology, some positive actions that you can implement into your daily life, and an exploration of just what is God calling people of faith to do in response to the greatest crisis human civilization has ever encountered. This presentation is brought to you by Jim Dunn. Welcome, Terry.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you. I don't know about you guys, but the last year and a half have been a bummer for me. They really have. I haven't been in front of an audience in person, which is what I much prefer to do since I am, I'm known for preaching and telling stories, so that's much better than in person. But this works. I especially appreciated that was the best sounding elevator music I've ever heard leading into this. So that's good. I appreciate that. Okay. So the last year and a half, if you've been at all like I have, and you've been taking this COVID serious, you've been isolated, and we're now just kind of coming out of the cocoon, right? We're finally being able to spread our wings a little bit and go back maybe a little bit into normal life. And so this is a good time to engage on this subject. Before I forget, normally I take 8 hours to do this, so obviously I'm not going to cover it today. We're just going to do snippets. But before I forget, I want to refer you to my website. On my website, sustainingcreation.org, you'll find a whole bunch of different resources that are available and free for your use. But especially wanted to point out the Seeds of Hope video series. So if you're ever wondering if we have the technology to handle this crisis, there's 40 videos in them, very short, 40 videos, very short, each one, that give you a solution on how it's working. But what I want to talk about today are my 48 steps to a sustainable life. 48 steps, yeah, 48 steps. You don't got to do them. Don't worry about it. You don't got to do them. But you'll find that they're categorized into different areas. They're under lifestyle, transportation, energy, community, sharing the message. The greatest truths throughout human history have always been most effectively conveyed to somebody else in the way of stories. So let me tell you a story. As she was describing, I have this really strange, wide background, right? A dozen years ago or more, I went on a series of immersion experiences around the globe to listen to voices that I don't normally get to listen to see people of diverse cultures and experiences so that I might gain a little wisdom from them. And so I went to Palestine to be among the people, just like this week, that live among the daily threat of life-ending violence. I went to Mexico to right on the border so I could experience what's it mean to live in a border town under our NAFTA treaties and all the poverty and environmental degradation that comes from that. I've been to Honduras to look at the climate crisis causing the migration, the mass migration to our southern border. A lot of that is rooted in environmental justice. But I want to tell you one story specifically from my experience in Colombia. I went down to Colombia as a member of the Christian Peacemakers team. We were called into a village up in the Andes Mountains. It was a mining village. And really, what I mean by mining, I mean mining like we did back in the 1860s, right? So it was mostly by hand and by mule. But like we mined back in the 1860s, and even like we mine now, there was a lot of environmental impact from it. Anyway, they had invited us to be there so that we would be in between the villagers and the Colombian army, which had set up in the jungle right outside the village. And they had hoped by having an international presence, then the army would stay right where it was at and not invade the village and take it over. Because in the history of Colombia, which doesn't have very good land records, if a land's unoccupied, then it's available. And in the Colombian history, they've had whole villages moved out, sometimes by our use of American paramilitaries. So the land was vacant and a corporation could take it over. And so this mining village were worried about that very thing because they were an artisan gold mining village. They mined gold dust. And there was a large global firm that wanted to take that over. And so they were afraid that the army was there to move them out so this great, big corporation could take it over. And so as part of our experience, they gave us a tour of just how they went about mining this gold dust. And my colleagues were absolutely fascinated by how hard they worked, how ingenious they worked with the limited technology that they had. And essentially, they dig out huge mounds of dirt by hand, and then you grind it with mercury, because there's an alchemic reaction between the mercury and gold dust that attracts the gold dust out of the dirt. And then, of course, you have to wash it to get rid of the dirt. And then you have to take what residual there is, and you put it in a little blast furnace, and you burn off the rest of the residuals. And you wind up, after you do that, with a little disc of gold. So my colleagues were absolutely fascinated by it, but I have to tell you, I was horrified because I'm a chemical plant manager. I'm a hazardous chemical expert. I've gone out on train wrecks to handle hazardous chemical exposures to communities. And what I saw was them poisoning themselves, the land forever, and ruining the brains of their children by all the mercury they were releasing into the air, into the soil, into the water. But I was there as a visitor. I was there to listen. So I said, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything. And so the next day, we went out to meet with the Colombian army in the jungle. Now, first confession, I don't speak Spanish. In fact, I don't speak any foreign languages worth anything. Right? And so they assigned me the task of watching the army snipers in the jungle in camouflage, and warn the group if they were getting ready to shoot. Now, what good that would do, I don't know, but they needed to give me a job, and this is what they gave me. And so the leaders who were fluent in Spanish spoke to the army colonel and explained the villagers' concern and what the reason we were there for, and then listened to what the army colonel had to say. And so we went back to the village council, and we met with them so that the village council could hear what did the army respond to. And I'm listening to my leaders who are there that are fluent in Spanish speak and explain all that had gone on, and I'm telling myself, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to be quiet, I'm not going to say anything, and as I listen, I just can't. I've got to talk. I can't let this go by. And so I asked for an interpreter to speak the words I wanted to say. And I start out by apologizing because I was probably going to insult them or at least hurt them. But I had to tell them that what I see as a hazardous chemical expert is that what they were doing was destroying that land forever, destroying their health, and the mercury, the heavy metal mercury, was poisoning the minds of their children. and they needed to find another way. And I have to tell you, when I sat down, there was absolute quiet. It seemed like it was forever, but it was really only a minute. And so I turned to one of the pastors that was with me that was fluent in Spanish. I said, could you offer a word of prayer because I've hurt them? And he said, no, wait. They're processing. They're processing. And the village president got up. He said, you know what? What that pastor says is the truth that we already know. We just refuse to talk about it. The truth that we already know. We just refuse to talk about it. So the next day, they called a meeting of the entire village in the only building that was big enough to hold everybody, which was the pool hall. And they asked me to speak again. So there I was, a stranger in the midst, willing to speak the terrible truth of what they were doing so that it would be out in the public, so that they would hear the words and have to confront them. Now, I come away from that experience with two conclusions. The first conclusion is the problem of destroying the world is not this little village in the Andes. No, the problem of destroying the world is my generation in my society that consumes 35 times what any other society does. And so that launched my ministry of sustaining creation. I went back and I got my doctorate so I would have ethical groundings for what I was to do. But it led me on a path, and you'll see all the resources in sustaining creation that we developed so that others might hear it. The other truth is, I really, really doubt that I changed anybody's behavior there. Maybe some of the other team members that were with me, well, maybe some of the people who were blast furnacing the mercury at least wore a respirator after I mentioned wear a respirator or wore rubber gloves. But they certainly didn't stop harvesting gold. And gold mining in South America, Central America, and other places in the world is a leading source of mercury pollution. That's still going on. But what changed is me. And by changing my behavior in the 12 years subsequent, I've exposed that new behavior to other people. And I've done what I call sowing seeds. And so that's really the name of the video series. It's Sowing Seeds of Climate Hope. So that's what I want to talk about today. All too often we argue about what is the right belief, the right knowledge, the right understanding, and we neglect right behavior. So we concentrate on orthodox and we neglect orthopraxis. And so the reason I put together 48 steps, 48 steps, is so that individuals who are so inclined could try some of those. But the most important thing that you can do is do it visibly so that somebody else might see what you're doing and wonder, is it that important to somebody that I trust, that they're willing to change their lives? Is it that important that I should do it too? And then you start sowing seeds and you cast it down. There's 48 different steps. Some of them are very, very easy. You're going to look at that list on my website, or the event providers can share that list with you. And you're going to look at the list, you're going to see some of them, you're going to say, oh, that is so easy. I don't know even why he typed that out, because I've been doing that forever. And you're going to look at some others, and you're going to say, you know what, Gallagher, you're nuts. You're absolutely nuts that you think I'm going to do that. But in between the, oh, this is so easy, and oh, you're nuts, there are some things that you could consider doing. But the key point is to do them visibly. Don't preach. Be the gospel by the way you walk, by the way you live, by the way you embrace God's good creation rather than consume it. So 48 different steps. They range from, well, changing our dietary habits. to changing our transportation habits, to changing what we talk about when we gather in groups, to changing how we interact with legislators so they might hear our voices and not just the people who are believing in alternative facts. So that's something to think about. Is there something that I could do in my life off that list, or something I'm already doing that if I made it visible, would it inspire somebody else to walk that path too? I have to tell you up front, forget about changing Uncle Joe at the Thanksgiving table. That ain't gonna happen. That ain't gonna happen. But you may well change someone or inspire them to dig a little bit deeper so that they might inspire somebody else. Now, there's a parable of the seer, the sower of seeds, that the gospel always talks about. And it talks about a sower goes out into the fields and he sows seeds, and some fall in among the thorns and then it gets swallowed and choked out by the thorns. And some falls on a hard path and the sun just bakes it and they never get a chance to root. Some fall where the birds grab and eat it and there's no chance. But some fall where the ground is just fertile enough that with God's gift of rain and sun, they bloom. That's what we do when we work on these steps, and we do it visibly. And when somebody asks you why you do that, don't try to convince them that they're right. Do it from a standpoint of why you do that, why it's important to you that you change a life away from consuming creation to protecting creation. Little bits, little seeds. You never know where the harvest is going to bound out. I can tell you now, 12 years into this, I still get coming out of left field from places I thought I had zero effect. Somebody will ask a question or request a resource or ask me to do a presentation like this. So if we can expand who is willing to live by example, then we can expand who is going to hear and see and contemplate, should I be doing that? What changes a path is not the best sermon in the world, although as a preacher, I'd love to think it was that. What changes a path is when somebody I know that I already trust gives me a new truth to consider that I do not yet accept. But because I trust them, because I have a relationship with them, I'm willing to consider. Because otherwise, if it's a stranger and it's somebody preaching to you, the shutters just go up, or the defense shields go up, and there's no chance. That's why talking to Uncle Joe at the Thanksgiving table ain't gonna happen. Just enjoy your turkey. Let it go. If somebody asks, how come you took up gardening? It's so much easier to go to the grocery store. You say, well, it's healthier. At least for me, and I'm concerned about my family, so I do it. Or if somebody says, why do you take public transportation? You say, well, I'd kind of like to cut down on the pollution that my kids have to breathe, or whatever works for you. 48 steps. Don't try to do them all. I don't do them all. Right? But see if it doesn't work for you. Right? I could go on for 8 hours. I'm not going to do that. So if you got questions, let's shoot them. Okay? Any questions?
So if you're watching on Facebook, please write them in the chat. Sister Peggy says, can't wait to look at Terry's website. So she's going to check that out. Spreading some of those little seeds of thought. Yes, the website is on screen. It is sustainingcreation.org.
How was my time in Palestine? It was stunning, actually, because I met people of peace on both sides of that conflict. And so that by listening, you realize that God's good creation transfers all over the boundaries that we artificially set up between us. Okay? So don't be afraid to listen. Well, if you were going to offer one suggestion, just one to start with, what would you do? Okay, skip doing the surveys that come across your thing and just send a personal note to your congressman that says you're a voter and you care about the future for your kids. Okay? What would you start living a more sustainable life? I started with diet. Obviously not the quantity I eat because I eat way too much, but I started with breaking my old habit of eating red meat. Now, I'm not a vegan, all right? Someday when I grow up, I want to be a vegetarian, but I'm not there yet. I'm still a carnivore, okay? All right, so, but you do what you can do, right? And don't blame yourself for not being able to do everything, all right? Even Mother Teresa couldn't do everything, all right? So don't quote yourself there. Do what gives you hope. Do what gives you an inspiration to continue on. This is not a race. This is a long journey, right? But right now, there's lots of positive things that are happening that we ought to be excited about. We're finally back in the global activities on this. Yeah. How do I refocus when I trip up? Part of it is having somebody who gives you honest feedback. You know? And so the person that gives me honest feedback, no matter what, is my wife. So she stirs me back on the straight and narrow when I fall off. And sometimes all it takes is raising an eyebrow, right? So, but on the back of my 48 steps, I also list a bunch of references that you might want to check out, people you might want to follow, educational resources you might want to tap into, and some of those give me hope. But the biggest thing as an engineer is that we've got the technology. So don't let anybody ever tell you that we can't do this because it's not physically possible. We've got that technology. What we're lacking is human behavior. But right now we're making big beats. You saw the president. The president drove off in an electric pickup truck and said, "This sucker is fast." That's changing the culture. Yeah.
All right, Terry. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Again, for more information and resources, visit Terry's nonprofit ministry website, sustainingcreation.org, or his Sustaining Creation Facebook page. Thanks again, Terry.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too.